Morning, Marty. Good morning, Barbara Schatz. This is your last opportunity to get a screenshot, by the way, if you're just tuning in and joining before I start painting and teaching. Good morning, Arena Sean. Good morning, Kathy Kepler. Okay. Good morning, Len Gatling. Debbie says, black-eyed Susans, please. Oh, that's weird, Kathy. Your roses don't open up for you. Sometimes putting them in warm water or putting a warm spotlight on them or in a warm window, like cutting them first, that can help. Good morning, Dinah June. Welcome, welcome. The sun is shining. Yes, it is. Good morning, Anita. She says, on a short break, I'll catch up with Art Life School lessons. Yay, awesome. Okay, good morning, Sabrina Tyre. So good to see so many of you. Okay, so before I get, I'm tripping over everything. Before I get started, I do have a question for you to ponder. And you can put your answer in the comments below. And there's no right or wrong answer here. I think it's just a good question to ponder for all of us, myself included, as artists. And that is, do you, whenever you think about your art, like, do you see your art as either A, a hobby, B, a career, or C, a calling? So I think it's a really good question to contemplate. Do you see your art as a hobby, as a career, or as a calling? And I think your answer to that will be very enlightening in terms of how you interact with your art life practice, with your painting practice, how you approach it, how you feel about it, how seriously you take it, how much time you make for it. And again, there's no right or wrong, but my take on this is that if we see things as a hobby, that's great. And most likely we will only kind of do that hobby as long as we're finding enjoyment, some amount of like enjoyment or pleasure or fun or some sort of reward from the hobby. Like we feel like the hobby is providing for us, right? Like it's either providing a source of learning or entertainment or growth, or it's, maybe providing a source of fun and joy. And so sometimes the problem with approaching things as a hobby is that, when the going gets tough, as they say, or maybe whenever we're not enjoying it as much anymore, we might lose interest. We might start looking for something else. And kind of leave, maybe even leave painting for something else for a while. And so there's just with each of these answers, there's a different mindset, and I would say heart set, involved in how we approach our art making. If you felt like your answer was career, I see my art as a source of income, as a career path, then, yes, you might be more interested in selling your paintings, making sellable art, entering shows, maybe getting awards. You see it as your career path. And I know that's, how I approached art, especially in the beginning, early days, was like, okay, this is going to be my career, my job, because, we're all supposed to have a career, and or a job or a way to make money. And so art was definitely became my way to, as a profession, became a profession. And that's okay too. Again, none of these are right or wrong, good or bad. I just think it's something good to contemplate today. And so sometimes if we're approaching art just as a form of a profession or a career, similar things can happen. Like we might change how we show up at the easel because we're more interested in career success or professional success. We might paint differently or change our style or change what we're painting in order to have more professional success, perhaps. We might lose interest in that career if we, kind of hit certain goals in that career, and maybe it's no longer as exciting or fulfilling, or again, we might get bored with it. Or it's a pretty common phenomenon to like hit, big goals and then lose interest. So with the first two options, there is a really big chance and risk of giving up or quitting or having like really long periods of not being dedicated to our art, or losing interest in it, losing that passion and that zeal and that vision for it, with those first two answers of hobby or profession. With the calling, however, if we really believe that something is a part of our calling in life, and our art is part of our calling, and we have tied our art to our internal values, and a good question to ponder here is like flashing forward to the end of your life. What would it look like if my art was a calling? What would that look like? What would make it more meaningful to me? And what would make it more in alignment with my values? And in that way, whenever we approach things as a calling, we show up much, much differently. We're much more committed. We believe in it more. We're less attached to, say, the outcomes of each particular painting. The emotional roller coaster is a little less up and down. I'm not saying you don't have any of that, but when you are grounded in something that is your calling and your purpose and part of your identity and part of your contribution, either to your family, like if one of your top values is your family and relationships, or your community and your society, really looking at how can my calling as an artist contribute to those values, contribute to my grandchildren or my children or my family in some way. And so the more that we can tie our art making in with our sense of calling and our sense of purpose, then we're going to be approaching it more from a very, grounded, heart-centered, vision-fueled place. So just something to ponder today, especially if you find yourself struggling with some of the things I mentioned under the hobby and career category. So a calling is more of like a sense of almost like a spiritual calling, a sense of a purpose, or, part of why you're here on earth is to be an artist and to contribute your artwork to the world. So ponder that, and maybe even take some time today to really think about it and journal about it. So, yes. And sometimes we resist even allowing ourselves to think of something as a calling or as our purpose. Maybe we think, oh, I'm just a hobbyist. I'm not really, it's not really my calling or my purpose. That's for the real artist. So watch out for things like that as well. But the least amount of resistance you will face with your painting practice is through approaching it as your calling and showing up as such, as if it's your calling. So let me know if that resonates in the comments below. And obviously there's a lot of, kind of inquiry, so to speak, an internal inquiry. If you feel like, yeah, I really haven't been approaching it as a calling. And people can approach anything as a calling. And in fact, they've done, studies. They took a group of people who were hospital cleaners, cleaners at a hospital, and they studied them, and they asked them, if they felt like was it a job, was it a career, or was it a calling? And what they found was that the people who were approaching it is like, this is just a job, a means to an end. They did not enjoy their job. They did not show up very well in their job. They, maybe had low performance. Um, and but the people who answered that it was their calling, they showed up in so much service to the hospital, to they really believed that what they did mattered. And so the quality of their work was much better. And the way that they connected with the nurses and the doctors and the patients, were much more of a sense of depth and connection, because they believed what they did mattered, that they had a larger contribution than, in their cleaning activity. So it's kind of a really interesting study, and that's just one example. Yeah, and knowing that something is a calling doesn't mean that you don't also have a career. But if you believe something is your calling, you also approach your profession and your career quite different. So it's really a heart set shift or a mindset shift. Same thing, like you can still, make art, for the enjoyment of it. But again, if you are seeing it as a calling, yes, you're still going to be able to enjoy showing up. You're going to be able to enjoy it more. And you're going to be able to find more meaning and more purpose and fulfillment in your art making practice if you're approaching it more as a calling. And it's not as if we just have one calling in our life, right? Like, we have purpose and calling. You have purpose and calling perhaps in being a partner or a wife or a mother or, a sister or a grandmother, so on and so forth. So it's also important. I think sometimes the word calling might also kind of make us think, oh, that's just for people who are doing really big things in the world. Like, like you have to be a political leader or a pastor at a church or, some kind of bigger calling or grandiose thing. So it's really just a matter of mindset. Like, how are you approaching, your art? And how deeply do you believe that it's meaningful and that what you do matters? That's the main point. Um, and then with that, dealing with the paradox of, I would say, dealing with the paradox of, the paradox involved in art making becomes easier to deal with if you're approaching it as a calling. You naturally have less detachment when it comes to the creative process whenever you approach it as a calling, as like almost like this is like my sense of duty to do this. And I don't know, the words sometimes don't quite hit the nail on the head, because duty gets a little, heavy feeling too sometimes. But anyways, just I invite you to consider contemplating that idea. I think it's really an important distinction and something I've seen in myself over the years. And sometimes we can lose connection with that sense of calling, and we need to reconnect to it. But it's something I've seen in students as well, and artists that I've worked with, professional artists as well. They might hit particular milestones and then you kind of see them sort of disappear, from the scene, or not be as active anymore if they're just approaching it as their profession only. And they don't have a strong connection to their sense of calling as an artist. So that's something to consider and contemplate. All right. Let's see. We've got some great comments coming in. Looks like lots of wisdom coming in here. So definitely check out everybody's comments. Consuelo says, painting is my passion. Yes, exactly. So and Consuelo, you're such a great example, because I remember teaching in Ardmore, and I remember recognizing that and feeling that with you, like the way that you approach your painting practice. I felt the difference between you and the other art students who were some of the other art students who were in the class, right? So something that's a calling, the vision and the passion we need less motivation to show up and do the thing, right? It's more of like a pull towards it. And Consuelo, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but Consuelo shared with me that she's on oxygen most of the day and can only be off of it for a little bit each day. And during that time that she's off of oxygen, that's the time that she's painting, I believe is what I'm hoping I'm getting that right, Consuelo. And so that is a sign of somebody who, is seeing something from a point of passion, from a point of, their purpose and their calling here on earth. And other people feel that too, and although there's still frustrations in the journey and the learning process, or frustrations perhaps with the outcomes of our paintings, when something is a calling, we keep showing up because we believe in it more. And we believe in ourselves more. It becomes less about us and more about what we are fulfilling. There's like a little dent or something in that panel. Does that make sense? Consuelo, if you have any words of wisdom for us, I'm curious because I know you were a mother, a grandmother, your husband, I can't remember, was he a geologist or a physicist? Anyways, so I'm curious, like, when you connected to that passion of painting and why, or if you just have any words of wisdom for us, since, you've been making art for a long time, very consistently. I've known you for 15 years. I met you whenever you were in your 15 years? No, 12 years? Maybe 12 years, 10 years. So I met you whenever you were in your mid 80s, painting with passion and such a strong desire to learn. If you have any words of wisdom to share with us, that would be fabulous. Fabulous, darling. All right, so I'm just toning this little panel with some burnt umber and liquid. And the paradox of painting, or anything really, is that detachment, right? Like, you actually get better at painting whenever you are less concerned with the outcome, or you're less attached, I should say, with the outcome. So a good question sometimes to ask is like, ask ourselves is like, am I being too careful in my paintings? Am I being too cautious? Am I trying to control the outcome of the painting too much? There's a fine line between being intentional and being perfectionistic. So I decided to do a very simple kind of arch arrangement here with these roses. And I also noticed yesterday doing the critique we had in Art Life School, we had a few people who were painting silver and kind of struggling painting silver. So I thought I would do these in a simple silver cup here. I'm just kind of massing that in, slightly off center to the right, and getting kind of my gesture lines here of the arch. And then this counter arch that's going to pull the eye back. And so it kind of becomes like this circular type of movement. And anytime you have something coming over the edge of the still life, you do want to make sure that you put in the table edge. You can do an eye level still life without putting in a table edge. You can just use tabletop. It doesn't, just because you show tabletop doesn't mean it's a looking down perspective. But in this case, anytime you have something coming over that front edge, you definitely want to utilize that to get more depth in the picture, get that overlap. And then we've got the three graces here of our roses, beautiful roses. And what's going to be interesting, I think, about these is that they're all three different colors, but they're all in the same color family. So I think that's going to really kind of unify them and tie them together. And plus, they're all roses. So I'm just starting out with kind of three simple, kind of spheres just to get the size and placement. I did want to mention a good trick if you're unaware is whenever you're painting roses, you can cut the stems above where the one of the leaves are breaking off, and then that's actually what I've used to create these leaves and create this arch, and then you can layer them in, because often, when I first started, you can do them short. Oh, I just got burnt umber on my boob. All right. You can do them short like this, and see how you can kind of turn them different directions. Ooh, look, that one has some really lovely purple. I bet that's from this kind of more purpley purpley pink over here. So you can cut them shorter, like the one on the tabletop, and also this one here in the setup is a shorter one. You can turn them on the lighter side or on the darker side. You can also trim leaves off. Don't be afraid to do that if, one of them are not really serving your composition. But it's nice and handy to have these. So for example, like if I wanted to have an overlap in front of, the in front of on this side, I could just pop that one in right there. Okay. So I learned that from studying Franz Mortelmann's rose paintings and trying to figure out how the heck did he get his leaves to be in that place? Because when I put roses in a vase, that's not where the leaves are. So naturally the leaves won't be in these positions. So it's a really good kind of compositional trick for roses. And then you can save those and put those in water, save them for if you're going to do multiple rose paintings, I would say. And so since I have, I'm going to do this on a lighter background since I have, the richness of the red rose and then the dark of the red, the silver. I'm already kind of in painting mode, so my brain's not quite working well on the word side of things, unfortunately. Just kind of massing in some of these leaves. Those are kind of big, so I may even make them a little bit smaller. I don't want them to kind of overtake the whole painting. And then this one I turned to the lit side, so that would be a light against the dark of the wood tabletop. Okay. Now, I do want to go ahead and mass in any kind of major shadow shapes I'm seeing on the roses. This one is, you can also think about roses in terms of like a cylinder, like a can, can of green beans or something like that. And massing in that ellipse of the cylinder for the shadow side there. This one's turned away from the light source, and so that one has the largest kind of shadow plane happening. Same thing on here, like where is the top of the cylinder, the top of the can, without all the petals? This one needs to go up a little bit taller. And where is the perpendicular part of the cylinder or can? It's going to be the perpendicular part here that's a bit more in shadow, minus the petals that are kind of folding out and turning under and catching the light. So you do want to analyze the structure right away, and like the angle of those, the top part of the cylinder, the angle of that cylinder towards the light, which direction is it pointing? And if you're in doubt, just look for the center of the rose and act as if you're going to put like a skewer through or a toothpick or something through the center of the rose. And that will give you the proper perspective on the flower. And you can do that for any flower, really, obviously. But that'll help to ensure that you don't start to turn all the roses facing head on and like a deer in headlights staring at the viewer, and all of them being kind of at the same orientation and perspective. Okay, and then now I'm just looking to establish like my dark edge against the background. Right now I'm trying to get the values, a rough idea of the values set up and any shadow shapes. This is not going to be the exact color. I'm just using burnt umber to establish values right now and kind of break this down one step at a time for myself. Okay, and then we have this beautiful uh, rich red. I think red looks so beautiful with a gray, with these grays, lighter tones and grays and neutrals. It makes the red even richer. So I'm going to wipe away where my major lights are here on the roses. This one can stay really just the way that it is because red is such a darker, this deep red is such a darker value. I want to make sure that that stays nice and deep and rich. And then I'll just kind of wipe out where the overlapping edge is of the leaf here. You don't have to get the whole drawing, precise at this stage, but I tend to just kind of indicate like, yeah, where is that leaf going to be? Usually those are either diamond shapes or like this one is really coming out towards us in perspective foreshortening. So it's kind of more of a triangular type of shape there. And then I want to go ahead and make sure I get in any and all cast shadows that I'm seeing on this table edge. That's immediately going to give me more depth of space in the picture. This leaf back here is one that I cut off on the back of the rose, so I'm not sure if I'll end up using that one or not. I'll go ahead and place it. It might be helpful just for another layer of depth in space. Okay. I'm not going to see a lot of the foot of this from this perspective of the cup. And now I want to go ahead and get in some of that background color in this first stage. Make sure that is angled as good as it could be. Okay. Yay, we've got tons of really beautiful comments coming in. Barbara says, black-eyed Susans. Okay. Love that. So for those of you who are, loved all of these answers, by the way, thank you so much for being so open and honest and, even vulnerable in some of these shares. And for those of you who haven't been able to connect to, a calling, a deeper sense of calling with your art, maybe just be curious about that and open about that and see if that leads you somewhere new in the process. How could it be even more meaningful, not only to yourself? I believe a calling is not only in service of our own development and growth, but also in service of others. So to give us a greater sense of meaning. So just something to perhaps tuck away in your heart and just getting curious about it, having an open beginner's mind about it, and maybe just sit with it and see if anything comes up. All right, I'm using some black, some Naples yellow, and some white to get my background started. I want to make sure that this goes light enough. If you want this to be a little more blue or a little more lavender, you could add in, I should put out some ultramarine blue actually. You can add in a little bit of ultramarine blue, and if you want it more lavender, add in a little pinch of alizarin crimson. I'm going to go more just for kind of a neutral gray. And then if I feel like I want to, add in some more color, I can later on. Ooh, yeah, it's so satisfying. So you want to make sure you get this on light enough. You can make it darker over here. So since I have some dark on my brush, I'll just kind of push some of that burnt umber into the gray. And this can be applied a little bit thinner, which will make it dry a bit darker too on this left-hand side. And by the time I get close to the cup and the red, I really want to make sure that I'm doing more light, and that means thicker, it means thicker paint. Okay, more white in the mix. You want to apply the paint thicker where you want it to dry looking more lit up, because oil paint, the thinner it's applied, dries a bit darker. Okay, so just keep that in mind. If you want this background to dry a lot lighter, then you want to make sure you're using enough paint. And sadly, my Kremnitz white I had out the other day is just starting, it's been out for a couple of days and it is starting to dry out a bit. So it's starting to get some little crumblies in it, which is not ideal for a painting or for the background, especially. You get those little boogers in there. So this is mostly black and white, but it has a little pinch of burnt umber in it, just to give the gray just a touch of warmth. And so that hopefully it doesn't feel too, in the end, too colorless or cold and gray. If you're using a titanium white, you may want to warm it up a bit more. Lead whites automatically have a little more warmth in them. Not sure quite yet what I want to do with these leaves over here. So for now, I'm going to paint them out, or paint that last one out. Could be by 10, have a little more room. So I size and place the roses a little bit big here for the video, so it shows up a bit better for you. Okay, so just want to get that going. I do like the richness of the red. Sorry, not the red, the kind of brown in front. So I think I'm going to keep that in this case. A little more warmth here on the tabletop. I'm using my liquid light gel to get this paint to move a bit more. And this kind of paint can be put down a bit thinner. Adding a little bit of alizarin crimson in there just to kind of warm it up. I'm sorry, not alizarin crimson, burnt sienna. I like to try to do some shorter strokes on the tabletop here. And then I think I'm going to lighten that up a bit with my background gray. Add some more burnt sienna into it. Pull a little more light on this tabletop plane. You don't have to fill out the entire tabletop or background, but you do want enough of that information in, because it's going to really impact, the relationships of how the other colors look in the painting. I'm going to add a little more light on the very front edge with some yellow ochre and Naples yellow. To pull out the front edge, and then you can blend that in so it doesn't look so, just isolated and stuck on a bit. All right, and I think that's enough to get going on the roses. Hey, Marnie, welcome. Good. I don't know what question I answered for you, but I'm glad I answered it. Okay. And yay, Manny. Yeah, you were one of the ones yesterday that had some silver, and so I thought this would be a good demo to do. I'm going to start first with the red rose and the red petal. And I'm going to start with kind of a deeper red with cab red light, alizarin crimson, a little bit of ivory black. You guys know I'm a big fan of less is more. The fewest colors I can kind of get away with, the better. And especially if you're a beginner, I think this is really critical. Or if you're just getting back into the saddle again, on painting. Or if you're just struggling in general with color mixing, you know, it's a good idea not to have too many colors to choose from. So, all right. And then I'm going to go even darker here. And you notice I don't mix into that same pile. I mix off to the side of this pile. So I can also kind of see the value contrast that I'm looking for. And so I'm going to mix some of this in for the underplane, keeping my brush flat to the canvas so that I can lay down paint that doesn't have a bunch of brush strokes, you know, lifting up the paint underneath. I think that's especially critical if you're painting wet into wet. You want to develop good brush handling technique. And so the biggest thing is just making sure you're putting down flat strokes so that you're not just kind of pulling up the paint underneath. Because if your brush is more perpendicular like this, and you're kind of scratching into that underneath paint, you're just going to start licking paint off the canvas. Okay, so you want to deposit nice flat pieces of paint. And then I'm reserving that red for the lightest light on these. So there's not really going to be any white in my lightest lights on the red rose. So I'm going to end up with like 3 values, okay, a dark, a middle, and a light on all of these roses. But for red roses, the trick is, you know, to reserve that purity of the red. You may not even need any Naples yellow light if you know, get the values started kind of dark enough. So you can utilize the richness and purity of the cadmium red light here to get the effect of the light. That way you don't end up with pink, okay? And you also end up with more saturation of color in your lights. I think it was yesterday, yeah, on Barbara's peacock. That was another good example in the critique for her. So if you haven't watched that, it's another good example of there's certain colors that just have such a luxurious saturation and richness in the light that you don't want to lose that saturation in the light by adding a bunch of white. Okay, so I'm coming in lastly with the light. In oils, we work dark to light, you know, thin to thick. So you build up the thinner passages first in the shadows and whatnot. And then in the lights, you want to come back in with those thicker brush strokes. And then you can, you know, make sure that they have a sharp edge on the outside on petals and leaves, and soft edge on the inside. So if you accidentally create, and on the outside, I mean the start of the petal. Okay, if you accidentally, and the start of the petal is basically the part of the petal that's facing the light source or overlapping against the background, or against, you know, like here, the start of the petal, here, this overlap, you know, this is the start of the petal here. Okay, is what I mean by that. So you want a sharper edge on those overlaps, and then softer edge on the insides. Okay, so if you get too many sharp edges going on, just come back in like with this, with less paint on your brush. And also you can just kind of blend all those layers together there. If you pick up any dark and you know you're about to do a light, wipe your brush. Wipe or clean your brush, or switch to a different brush so that you make sure that this lit edge here is nice and rich and luminous, stays that way, and doesn't pick up too much of the underneath. Now, you can go 1 notch lighter on these. I'm kind of seeing a spot in particular. Colors like this remind me of like velvets, you know, like a rich royal blue or a rich red velvet. Then you can, you know, put maybe a little bit of Naples yellow. I prefer Naples yellow over white because white just takes it to pink. Okay. Is this helpful so far? You could also kind of darken some of your reds with some ultramarine blue. It can quickly go to purple, which, you know, very purple, which you may not want. But of course, you can get some nuances of other colors involved. I like to keep it simple, sweetie. in my case. So, all right, so now we can do pinks. And I think a really easy shadow pink is burnt umber. Okay, burnt umber, cab red light, and some white. Okay. And then I see from there, like, oh, do I need to, maybe add a little black or a little bit of blue or alizarin crimson into it? So I think I'm going to make this one a little more purpley by adding a little bit of ivory black and a little bit of alizarin crimson. This one is going to have some white in the mix because most of the colors I'm using to make this shadow color are very, very dark colors on the palette. Look at that. That's just perfect. Beautiful. At least I think it's perfect. We'll find out. So just blocking in the overall shadow and the cast shadow here on this rose as like one shape, and then maybe just indicating where the little bit of cast shadow in the center of the rose is there in the center. Okay, I'm wiping that out of my brush and might need to put out more cad red light. And since I know cadmium red light is such a strong tinting strength, I'll just I could have also pulled some from that pile. I'll just kind of start my mixture for this off to the side. So you can go to artlifewithkelly.com. Sorry, usually I put that in the description. Anyone who's interested in joining the Art Life School or signing up for lessons, you can go to artlifewithkelly.com. There's also a lot of, really good freebies on that website to get you started as well. So you can sign up for any of those too. Let's see, I'm going to put out some more alizarin crimson. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to go a little cooler on this pink. I think I shall. Let's try a little bit of alizarin crimson. When you're mixing in these lights, you want to slow down with your brush. Really pull some paint on the tip of your brush. There, I would highly recommend not liquefying your your lights too much here. Okay, because again, we want thin versus thick. So thin in the shadow, especially with oil painting. And with oils, you have the maximum capability of achieving that thin versus thick because oil is the binder versus water-based media is water is the binder. And so if you think about what happens if you pour water onto a surface, it flattens out. It takes the form of that surface, which is flat in painting. Versus oil, oil has a little more density to it, and but with acrylics, you can definitely add do like thinner, more medium or more water in the thin passages versus something like a liquid light gel like I use. I'm going to wipe out where this petal is because I kind of got a bunch of dark down there. And then you can, perhaps switch to things that like a heavy body acrylic for your lights to achieve more of that thin versus thick. So there's lots of ways to do that with acrylic. More white, I'm washing out more of the color. So this is kind of opposite of the red rose, right? Because the values are different in this pink rose. So I'm going for less color in the light, more white to really get that lit up, quality. And then there's going to be more color in my shadows and in my halftones. Does that make sense? So here in this section, these are the two most lit up petals here. So here in this section, I'm going to put in more of like a middle tone pink. So I'm still starting with basically 3 values and 3 colors, even on this pink rose. It's just that the colors and values are different than the red rose. Hope that's helpful. And I should say too, like if you're doing a higher key painting like this, grab some of this red over here. If you're doing a higher key painting like this, and most of your objects are more colorful or darker or the same value, you will not have halation. Okay, so the halation will come through reflected lights in the darker objects themselves. But the only way you get halation is whenever the object is darker, lighter in value than the background. So you can't have red, doing a halation in the light background. It'll just look like the rose is bleeding to death. So just keep that in mind. All right. And there's a little more red in here for some glow. So more of kind of that more pure cad red is going to come through in terms of light passing through the petals. And I'm sitting on the right-hand side of these flowers, so I'm seeing more glow because I'm sitting on the shadow side. Sometimes too, you might need a little Naples yellow in with that to get it a little more glowy, or like a yellow ochre would also work for that glow. And then the very back petal edges, I just want to kind of gray down some of those. And then this one, let's see, I've still got some gray on my palette. So I'm going to steal some of that in with this kind of middle tone red, which I put a little more alizarin in to go a bit cooler. But you do have a shadow side here on the left-hand side, since these are flowers are typically concave, unless you're dealing with like a closed bud or a tulip, that hasn't opened or something like that. So your anything that's concave, what should be your lit side in the concavity will be in shadow in the cavity, however the proper way is to say that. I'm just going through and kind of trying to refine this a bit. This one, has a bit more complexity. The angle is facing more directly towards me. I'm going to steal some of this background gray here to get a little more luminosity. So much like painting glass against a background, any of these petals that are directly against the background, if they're see-through enough, you would have a little bit of that background color showing through there. I'm going to take a little more time, bear with me, to refine this rose here. We've got this petal in front. I also have to kind of analyze like which petals are kind of more in foreshortening. They're going to be skinnier. And then which petals are more folded out. I'm seeing more of the form and they're catching more light. Those are going to be bigger and broader. This one on the inside, you could also switch down to a smaller brush on a small canvas. I've got a number 2 going on right now, which is a little bit bulky and clunky for the size, but I have enough practice with it, I can pull it off. But don't feel like you have to do that. Reach for a smaller brush if you need to. There's no sense in suffering just for suffering's sake. And then the one critical thing to mention on these very subtle And again, you have to really in this sense, you kind of have to know what you should be looking for, which is what I'm telling you to look for right now, which is on the very, very top of these petals that are mostly in shadow, you're going to have a little edge of light, okay? So you want to make sure, again, that's kind of the starting edge. So you want to make like here where this petal is pinching on the inside. Now, sometimes people try to make this happen by drawing it on, and making it look like an outline or drawing it on. But in painting, we don't have any lines, we have edges. No lines, we have edges. As soon as you start trying to do lines in an oil painting, everything starts to look flatter and like a colored in coloring book. Okay, so you want two edges, meeting there, not an outline. And sometimes too, people have a tendency to make that, kind of do that all over, make it a little too obvious. Just going to come back in and re-strengthen my cast shadow. This is really critical to make sure I don't lose this cast shadow, which is so challenging to do on such a small scale. But any of these dark accents, I want to make sure that I'm holding on to those. Sometimes painting wet into wet, we can kind of lose those things as we go. And whenever I'm here doing this, I can also kind of shape up some of the petals. It's also why it's nice to have, all of your colors, have separate piles of colors here that you can choose from, where you don't have to remix up the color again. There's a little bit of, kind of darker color in the center. Most roses do go either darker in the center or more colorful in the center, or where that spiral begins to happen. Here, I'll type in the URL for Marnie. Yeah, join us, Marnie. We would love to get to know you and work with you. Okay, and have you a part of Art Life School. So the next rose, the rose next to it's important for me to get in this color and value, because it's going to make this pink make a little more sense value-wise. And so I'm going for more of a purpley pink here with more alizarin crimson and some ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue is your purple based blue. And so you definitely want to use that. You could also reach for like a quinacridone magenta for this rose if you want it to be even more hot pink. Okay, but just want to make sure you don't reach for like a green base blue, like a phthalo blue or cerulean or something like that. I can see here that I can get this petal here a little bit bigger too now that I'm here in this section. I think that was part of the issue here, was this is getting a little crunch. Squashed in. Okay, so there's a little bit of white in this color that I'm mixing for this kind of more hot pink rose, because it has to have some white or else it won't look like color, because the two colors I'm using are totally dark pigments and transparent pigments. Just going to block this color. It's kind of interesting. You don't have to start each rose in the same way. I think this one I'm going to have an easier time with if I just start with one mass of color and then add in kind of my middle tone color, and then add in my darks and my lights on top of that. I'm definitely going through the white. I probably should turn titanium zinc on this one since it's a higher key background. But much like sometimes being too cautious. We can be too careful or too cautious in our paintings. We can also be too stingy in our paintings. So make sure, double check and make sure you're not doing either one of those. If you need more paint, put out more paint. And, you know, if, next time I can catch that if I don't want to spend so much money on my white for this painting. But I also love that white, so it's worth it. So I'm mixing up some background color here just to get some sharper edges and overlaps against the background. Making sure that that is light enough in value, especially right there, because that's an area that I want a lot more contrast. And another, like I said, another good question to ask yourself is, are you being too careful? You know, are you being too controlling in your painting? Are you, you know, kind of anxiously making brushstrokes? So if you find yourself doing that, loosen up, baby. You know, it's like loosen your grip on the bone, Wilma. Let go a little bit, you know, play a little bit more, tap into a little more freedom here. See, you know, sometimes if we're being too tight or too like trying to ensure the outcome, the paradox, that's what the paradox I was talking about with painting. The paradox is that sometimes we get further away from a really strong, good painting because of that. So loosen up, you know, loosening up on, you know, how trying to control how perfect this turns out, or am I doing it right? Is every brushstroke exactly correct? Loosen up. Sometimes too, it's a matter of destroying something that you kind of put in already. All right, so going for a lighter, so I was catching myself doing that. You know, again, there's a difference between being intentional. I think it's a good balance to be, you know, intentional, trying to do a good job and trying to understand, but then that can, you know, sometimes we can quickly get into perfectionism and kind of the anxiety that comes along with perfectionism. So the secret really is, oddly enough, to kind of let go of needing this to be good, needing it to end up a certain way, letting go of the need that's involved in that sensation. Okay, so, and then that kind of opens you up to, you know, Bob Ross would call it happy accidents. It also opens you up to exploring a bit more if you can detach a bit more. Opens you up to more curiosity. You know, what if I try this? Allows you to observe better, so because you're not so focused on yourself and what this painting can do for you and your self-esteem today. So coming back in with some of these darks, you know, I'm kind of liking putting in some more purples, a little more ultramarine blue in this mixture. I think that's working well. You know, it's nice sometimes to have, you know, obviously that, like, oh, this is what I know what works on a red rose, but then sometimes we can follow that kind of formula, maybe a little too tight or a little too close. So you definitely want to have, you know, some places to start or kind of some formulas to start with, but I just say make sure you don't get trapped in, you know, checking off the list, step 1, step 2, step 3, you know, to the point where you maybe don't allow anything new to come in to your painting process. I'm just loving a little more of this purple color, so I'm trying to infuse some of it in my other roses. You'll know whenever you're not caring enough. You'll feel it, And, if you're somebody that cares a lot, you're never not going to care. If somebody doesn't really care about what they're doing, it's going to show in their work. So if you're someone that cares a lot, you don't have to worry so much about losing that. So don't be afraid to let go of some control every now and then and see what can happen with the paint. All right, so really this silver is almost going to paint itself, to tell you the truth. It's actually quite simple. Ivory black for these dark darks. Silver, sometimes we just overcomplicate things, and sometimes we just don't understand how to approach something yet. So, or to know what to look for. And that's what I'm here for, is to help pass on, those things to you that I've learned over the years. So just really the trick, I think, is, again, kind of like the red rose, making sure that you're starting off pushing your darks dark enough. Okay, and then just a very, very simple color mixture. I'm using my background color and some ivory black to start these in between. Middle tone colors. You can leave some of that burnt umber showing through as well. That's kind of interesting. And then you have a part on the form that is the path of light. I did that with more Naples yellow with the black. Okay, and then any of the colors that are reflecting into the silver. And this is where I want to really make a strong point here, so pay attention. This is important. Okay, do not focus on the reflection itself. I want you to focus on the overall cup, or focus on the thing that's causing the reflection, and paint this in that context. Paint it looking at the rose petal, not the reflection, so that you're not painting the too sharp of edges, or too, where it looks like a whole other object has been pasted on. Same thing with the greens. I don't have any greens yet. I'm going to use the ultramarine blue, but I'll get, a bit of green going here with some ultramarine blue and some yellow ochre. Now, my highlight should overlap in front of these reflected lights, so I'm probably going to have to redo that or put another layer on top. And you know what? That's not a mistake. Like, layers are good in painting. So sometimes too, it's just knowing, like, oh, it's fine. It's just oil. It's just oil paint. Oil, it likes layers. Okay, so, but you do want to make sure that wherever your highlight is, that it's really dominant and over top. And if something like that happens, because you do want to apply it quickly so it gets that nice shine. You got a little too footloose, fancy free, a little wild. The brush kind of took off without you, Again, kind of a good example of the beauty of letting go of a bit of control, loosening your grip on the paintbrush, and conceptually in your approach to the painting. You can just pull that right off or paint over it. Putting a little more gray in that undertone color just seems to read a bit better in the context with this background. A little piece of light here in that very back tip petal. Is this helpful today, I hope? Hope I'm hitting some main points that you can take away to your own studio practice. And then sometimes too, you can just, whatever all the colors are here in the darks, kind of mix them all together, maybe grab some little medium, to join forces here. A little bit of warmth in this silver from reflected light from the red table. But overall, silver itself does not have any color. it is neutral, much like a white or a black object. It's just like gray. It's gray, black, and white essentially. So the only color it really gets is from the colors in the environment. All right, so I'm going to start off making some of these darker greens because that's going to be a beautiful silhouette against the background with some ivory black, ultramarine blue, and cad yellow deep. These are really just going to be a silhouette shape, and if you need to modify that shape or get a little more movement, don't forget about gesture and movement. You know, that's also why sometimes I'm not a huge fan of, you know, really honing in on those leaves from the beginning. You know, they're so much easier to paint on top of the background, and sometimes you notice, oh, this kind of feels like it needs to be a little more over here, or a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. So I'm just starting all of these leaves off right now in one color. Really try to get some sort of movement, like if a nice breeze blew over this still life, does it feel like those leaves would move in the breeze? That's how it should feel. Okay, you don't want them to feel stiff and like stone or cement, or like this metal cup, which feels more solid and heavier and unmovable, right? Like it might take a mild earthquake to knock over the cup, or me running into the still life stand, which happens sometimes. Oh boy. But just a gentle, you know, breeze could kind of blow these leaves a certain direction. I'm just trying to clean up some of the background burnt umber here that I repositioned this with. Okay, so you want to make sure it has that feeling, that sensation to it. Those are the unseen things that sometimes we forget to put into our paintings. We just get focused on drawing and shapes and what's the color and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And we forget about, you know, some of those really important things like movement, you know, and weight. What's the texture? What's the weight of the object? There's a couple little highlights down here I want to get. The thing that is creating halation, and it's not really a halation because that only happens, like I said, with light against dark, but the thing that's creating more reflections and movement of light is the light background. So, you know, there's going to be a little bit of reflected light here on the very back edges of the silver cup, but you do not want it to be as strong and as striking as your highlight on the silver. And I could even push that highlight a little bit further. Just a little pinch of white there. Okay, I want to start some of my lighter green with some lemon yellow, some ultramarine blue, a little bit of Naples yellow. Lemon yellow is your coolest. It's going to be your coolest cadmium yellow. And so for these cooler greens, cooler, lighter greens, I'll reach for that more than the cad yellow deep. That's a very orangey, warm yellow, cad yellow deep. I'm just sticking with ultramarine blue, mostly because that's the blue I've used throughout the whole painting. You could also make these greens with black. One word of caution I would say with green is just, unless green is like a really big color in your color design, you know, try not to make the green so intense and so overpowering that it starts to take away from the rest of the painting. Okay, so I do want to keep these greens a little bit softer. I also like how there's always like a little bit of red in the spine on these red. The stems that have the red came from the red roses. Thinking I'm missing out on a glow opportunity here, the inside of that petal. just looked up and saw that and caught that. So curious, because these have so much light. I'm curious if okay, I'm going to put some of those in the light blocker. So the green I'm seeing is like super vivid green, on these leaves over here. I really don't want that. It is not going to be a good color with this. It's like too yellow green, and with all these cool colors. So I'm just going to make it the color and value that I want. No one will ever know the wiser. On something like this, you either need to stop before it gets to the edge of the painting, you need to make it shorter, smaller, or stop, or you need to just take it off the edge so it looks more intentional. I'm going to stop mine there. Sometimes I like to draw the edge of the leaf and then fill in the middle. That's been kind of a good approach, or just kind of massing in. Again, loosen your grip. Loosen your grip whenever you pick up paint, pick up a lot of paint, which I know feels, sometimes can feel unnerving to do, especially whenever you see somebody else like, oh, they just did it right the very first time, doesn't that just piss you off? But sometimes the misconception whenever we see someone who's been painting a long time and it comes out so effortless, can be that, that they never felt that overwhelm from the uncontrollability of the oil paint, which is not the case. So I am a big, believer in embracing, leaning into the paint, leaning into the sloppiness of it, the messiness of it, so that you can learn how to control it better. But if you are approaching it right away from too much control, the paint is going to master you. You're not going to master the paint. The brush is going to master you because you're approaching it out of fear, instead of like, let me get this stuff on there, push some paint around, which is what I always say, push some paint around. And then, hey, if I screw it up, if it gets screwed up, it gets screwed up. It probably will. And, that's part of painting, is learning, okay, now what? Now, how do I course correct that? And I don't like this leaf back here. So it's just too many shapes on this little painting. And too much green, like I was talking about. So I'm just going to take that off. Come back in with background color. It's also learning with oils, especially because you have more time to adjust things. Also learning how to make those adjustments because you have time to make the adjustments. So mixing up more of this background color. And this is really how these leaves are looking here, one kind of on top of the other. I'm not sure that's ideal. I think I'm going to take this one out. It looks a little awkward in the painting. So that's another thing is like, it's not necessarily a successful painting if you copy everything in your still life exactly as you see it. That's not what makes the painting a success. So at some point towards the finish, you have to kind of just start looking more at your painting and less at the still life and really looking at how are the shapes, how's my proportions? How's the negative spaces in the composition? Do I have enough? Do I have too many shapes in the painting? Do I need to take something out, or do I have too little going on? Things like that you want to be thinking about rather than, did I replicate this still life setup exactly? Okay, and then lastly, we do have to have, a stem in here. You can do that with like a round brush. That's one option. Or again, you can do it with your palette knife. If a green is getting too toxic green, throw some red in there. Either burnt sienna or alizarin crimson or even burnt umber would work. Now, with these stems, you want to make sure that you stop. Don't make it look like it's coming right out from the edge, I would say. That's kind of the biggest thing I would caution you against with these stems. And you can also use these kind of round brushes to kind of make maybe some sharper points on your leaves. There's a stem in here. Tie stuff together here a bit in the shadows. Anything that's maybe feeling a bit too broken up. If you want to push some of these cast shadows a little, like this one here, maybe a little darker with some ivory black and alizarin crimson. Tie the darks together a bit more here. Unify things a bit more. You want the lights to kind of flow together and the darks to kind of flow together. And I think I'll just use this little bit of green that's there. What is that called again? Coccyx? Can't remember. This one also is kind of strange because this leaf here, because it just looks like I think it's gonna make the red rose look like it's just wearing a hat if I put it there where I see it. And you can't always, control everything about these leaves. You can try to trim them off or cut them or whatever, but a lot of times they're just going to go where they go. So and then anytime I'm going between a light and a dark or two different colors, I like to just wipe my brush and make sure that, okay, I'm going to do a little bit of gray, and with this red on the back edge, you're pretty much always going to have a bit of that background color showing up on the back edges of these petals. There's a little bit of transmitted light coming through. I'm going to do some alizarin crimson and cad lemon and white. This little bit of glow through the dark. I just want it to be a little flavor of warm and vibrancy there. Get that sense of glow. Okay. All right, everybody. Let me know if you have any questions before we go. I'm going to come back in and kind of anchor down some of these objects with my cast shadows. Ditch the baby brush. Oh my God. That's going to make it take forever. And it's such a soft hair brush too, so it's not really going to put paint down. It's just going to get super blendy. Just coming back in looking for some stronger shadow tones here. Cast shadows. This is all still just the burnt umber I started with, which is nowhere near as deep and rich as we can go on those. And also this gives me an opportunity to kind of sharpen up that edge in front. Darken towards the top of these vases and whatnot, you have more cast shadow. So just again, trying to kind of connect and tie these darks together. Make sure that it moves from dark to light from top to bottom there. Got all this red on the palette. Let me see if I can use that with some yellow ochre to get more light and warmth on the front table edge here. So you can apply the paint, kind of more like filling in, but then I would recommend that you come back in and make shorter strokes across the form. A little bit of light, a little more edge on this table edge. However you can create that edge, do it. I tend to twist my brush that's just kind of particular to, again, just things I discovered, painting. Nobody showed me how to do that. It just kind of naturally occurred to me to do my brush that way. And so you can create the same edges with different brush techniques. Oh yeah, I was going to paint that green out. That's right. So I wouldn't obsess over how did Kelly use her brush. I mean, if it works for you, great. But if you can't, if that's just too uncomfortable for you to try to twist your brush to get that edge, again, you can create it another way. There's always more than one way. There's always more than one color to use, more than one type of brush stroke or brush manipulation technique to use. So try not to get too hung up on those things. But part of discovering your own brush language, your own brushstroke language and brushstroke handling is by, again, kind of allowing yourself to explore more and stumble into things sometimes, stumble into things that work for you. And then being honest about, does it really work? Did that really work? Did that really get the effect I wanted? Just trying to soften some of these interior edges just a little bit where the light's meeting the shadow, and pulling off some of that paint. And you can also use some of that background gray again for that. Yay, Kathy! I'm glad that things are finally clicking. You are so welcome. Oh, there's Kathy Dunigan Garrison. Awesome. You're so welcome. Now you can do a cast shadow under this ledge, or you can just pull that light all the way down. Try it if you want to do the cast shadow underneath, try it. If it feels like if you're doing a small painting like me, if it feels like it's just too much activity down here, you can always just make it a simple, drop down table edge all the way to the bottom of the painting and just bring focus and attention at the top here. So, again, it's kind of just really thinking about everything. Everything makes a difference. And sometimes, though, you might just not be there yet in your development to where you can think about everything like that. But I always do want to mention it and throw it out there because I think these are little things that often don't get talked about. Sometimes, at least in my past experience with working with instructors, sometimes these are things that kind of get overlooked. And they are important. So let me see. What do you guys think? Do you think the edge being defined with the cast shadow underneath is useful, or does it feel like it's just kind of cutting the painting? My thought is it feels like it's just kind of cutting the painting or into another divisible space. Anyways, that's my vote. It feels a little too claustrophobic or cluttered with that in. So I'm going to come back in with my the color I used here on the ledge. I'm just going to kind of pull that down. You can just paint it right over the dark. It's okay. It's no worries. Now you could also make this a cool tabletop plane if you wanted to, kind of keep going with this cool of the background. This could be just like another gray color. Again, you don't have to copy the color of the whatever you have in your studio, whether, if you have more of a brown. One color I would advise against using all the time is just a stark white. So hard to judge values against stark white anything. So I would avoid a stark white tabletop and a stark white backdrop. Even if you're doing high key, I would recommend that you don't just use like a stark white wall. Um, you can have like a white cloth or something like that in your painting, but I would caution against surrounding your still life with too much stark white. It just, it's so white, that stark white is so reflective of light. It's almost like trying to paint looking into the sun. It's just more challenging. So even if you're doing a high key like this, like I have a really light colored cloth, or if you have, like construction paper or, um, you know, uh, pieces of wallpaper or mat board or something like that, you can do things like that. So I kind of like the warm foreground. These are recorded. They are available through the end of the week. This is part of a special February series I'm doing that I did this month. So I've done one of these every morning. This is the last week of them. You can watch them here on the Facebook channel through the end of the month, or the first of the month, March. And then for Art Life School members, these are, of course, we've already been putting them in your library. So they'll be available to you permanently in the library. So you have a few more days to enjoy these on the Facebook page if you are not an Art Life School member. I just want to ground the foot of this with a little bit of black there. Okay, everybody, I'm just going to check in right quick and see if there's any questions that came in. Let's see here. Oh, thank you, Lynn. This is a 6x8. Yes. I wanted to go a bit bigger, but that did not work out. I need to save my 8x10s for Art Life School lessons for March. Thank you, Kathy. She says, you explained so well. I don't think I will ever hear enough. Always a takeaway. Yes, let me know any takeaways today. Did anything kind of like, oh, that clicked. Oh, that made sense. Still don't really like how that leaf turned out there. So when in doubt, paint it out, especially if it's not critical. I'm going to paint over this with some background color. I do not want that messing up my composition. I did like the darker leaf that was there though. So I'm just using a soft-haired flat brand is great. They have even sent me acrylic brushes and watercolor brushes, and honestly, every single one I've used, because I did a bunch of gouache paintings in Europe, every single brush I've used of theirs has been just lovely and so well made, they last forever. I will say I am struggling with the new brushes because I'm having to break them in. So I'm still finding myself reaching for the ones that are almost dead at this point. So they got anybody relate to that? New brushes, it's like, it's a blessing and a curse because now you have to break it in and you have to kind of mold it to how you paint, and it will mold over time. And that's a nice thing about this brand, is that they mold with how you put paint down. A little bit of that red in there, I think. Okay. So mostly I was just trying to kind of smooth this out, but sometimes while you're doing that, you stumble upon, I am really not digging that. So it's better to make the change, especially if you know you're not going to go back into the painting. Better to make the change now before you wrap it up. And just make sure that you are wrapping things up, refining things intentionally, so that everything feels like, yeah, that's exactly how the painting was supposed to be. And it was always meant to be that way. It doesn't feel like you just kind of stopped short, but it also doesn't feel overworked either. So just, wrapping up anything that needs a little finishing off. And on these kinds of smaller paintings, I just sign with the back of my brush by carving in with the wood handle. Manny says, oh my gosh, yes. Gail says, this is so helpful. Thank you, Kelly. You're so welcome. Okay. So I'm going to turn this, get this a little bit closer. If you want to take a screenshot of the painting, see if I can get it to where it's not quite, doesn't quite have the distortion of the camera angle and the glare. I'll tilt it to cut any glare from the oil or the light hitting the oil. So you can get a screenshot of that if you want to paint along with us from the recording. And if you didn't quite catch a screenshot of the setup, it is here. You can get a screenshot of that. Now, obviously, that's just because I'm doing these Facebook Lives. So in our Art Life School lessons, you know, all of your references are given to you, of course, with nice photos. See secondary, where are secondary reflections, Debbie? Can you clarify that for me? Just what you mean by that? Okay. Let's see, any other questions? Great question. Debbie, if you could just clarify that for me. I don't know what secondary reflections means. Thank you, Lana. You're so welcome. You're so welcome, Maria Donnelly. Yay, Marnie. Woohoo, that's a win today. She says, so inspiring. I started in college as a studio art major and then made it my minor, majoring in art history. That is so funny. I almost minored in art history. And then whenever I realized how many papers and how much reading I was going to have to do, I thought, no, I would rather paint. I suck at painting. I need to get better at painting. I can't eat up all that time writing papers, but I love art history too. So that's another passion of mine. So majoring in art history and minored in oil painting. That's awesome. And she says, so excited to pick back up a brush. Yes, yes, yes. Good. Then see, that is part of my calling. Comments like that, that just like fills me up, fills up my heart. Hearing somebody in the vase. Now we got clarification. Thank you, Debbie. In the vase, there are other streaks of light less than the main reflection. You only painted one. Let me see. Maybe in here? Is that what? I mean, yeah, it's like super shiny metal, so it's going to kind of pick up everything. I think maybe you're talking about this here. So unfortunately, part of that is I have a window light, a very large window light facing east behind me. And so some of that is coming from that window light, whereas this is my dominant spotlight highlight. So, you know, that's the one I really want to stick with. And highlight, not reflection, she says. This is the one I really want to stick with, is this dominant one. You know, if I squint my, there's like two strips. I think I'm seeing what you're talking about now. There's kind of two strips of light. Well, one of those strips, unfortunately, is this east facing light window of mine, which does bring more light into the room, but it also causes kind of a double highlight, like you're saying. So everybody, you do want to be really careful of that. You want to know what that, you don't want to put that in, basically. And like yesterday in the critique, I think it was Pam Engel, you know, I could tell she's like painting in a room that had a bunch of fluorescent lights overhead, those rows of fluorescent lights, which whoever invented those, I'm very upset that they invented those. But anyways, those are very problematic to paint under. I mean, especially if they're green fluorescent lights, gag me. That's terrible to paint by, but it creates a bunch of different highlights, like you're saying, not reflections, highlights. So yeah, you want to stick with what? All right, everybody. I think that is everything. Thank you, Lynn. Maria says, I definitely went looser on this. Awesome, awesome. All right, everybody. Much love. Happy painting. I'll see you back here tomorrow for another demo, probably on the little black-eyed Susans. Okay, bye for now. Ow.